What's up, everybody? Welcome to the official BzG review for Daredevil Season 2, currently streaming on Netflix. My name is Barrett, and today I'm here to walk you through my reactions and feelings of the second season of Daredevil. Now, this is where I'm going to stop you guys right here and tell you full spoiler warnings. I'm going to spoil the fuck out of this season just because I'm going to say it right now. A lot of the production side of the show was pretty on point with season 1. If you liked the acting, the directing, cinematography, all of that stuff, I think it's on par with season 1. So I really like that stuff. The things I have to talk about a lot today are the stories and sort of how they develop throughout the season. So full spoiler warning right here. Now, if you're still here, you've probably watched Daredevil Season 2, or you're just a crazy motherfucker and you don't even care. You're like, I'm going to spoil the whole thing for myself. You're crazy. Go watch it. Go watch it. Well, anyway, the first thing I want to talk about for Daredevil Season 2, and this also lines up with a viewer question. Jacob Lightly on Twitter asked me, he didn't even really ask, he just said, just forget Daredevil, or how he spells it, just forget Daredevil. Only talk about Jon Bernthal and how this is the best adaptation of a comic book character ever. Now, of course, the first thing I want to talk about is Punisher, because the Punisher was the big thing that the show was advertising before it came out. Jacob, Jon Bernthal was awesome as the fucking Punisher. And I'll get into my thoughts a little bit. I'll elaborate more on my thoughts and feelings. But the best comic book adapted character ever? I don't know. I don't know if that's really true. I'd have to think about it more. I don't know. I don't know if it's the best. I don't know. I honestly think maybe Howard the Duck might overtop it. Maybe Mr. Fantastic from the new Fantastic Four movie. No, I'm just joshing you. Yes, Jon Bernthal was really, really fucking great as the Punisher because I'm not a huge Punisher fan. I watched the really shitty movie from fucking 12 years ago, and I didn't even bother with the one that came out in like 2008 or whatever. But I know the basic story of the Punisher, where his family gets killed, and then he sort of just goes on this rampage and starts taking down like mob families or gangs or whatever that just had to do with his family getting killed. So it was great knowing his basic story and not knowing much past that, and going into the season knowing where he's coming from, but they don't reveal it like right away. It's like all we know of the Punisher right now is he's killing these gangs, he's killing bad people. So there's like this weird divide in the public of Hell's Kitchen, where like half of them are like, yeah, he's doing what the police can't do, like fuck yeah, and then there's the other half where it's like he can't take the law in his own hands, and that's what he's doing. He's legally not allowed to do that. He's a psychopath. And then we slowly learn through actually like really clever development throughout the season. We slowly learn what really happened. He fought in Iraq, which I thought was a good update for the character. Like, he fought in a war, and it was in Iraq because, that was a thing that happened. That really sucked. And I imagine that a lot of people who fought in that during that time probably knew, like, well, I don't want to speak for soldiers and how they experienced the war in Iraq, but I imagine you don't come back from that in the best state of mind at all. So he talks about at one point in a monologue where it was already sort of hard enough to come back because he didn't feel like he was fully there, and then his family, lo and behold, got like taken away from the, or no, he doesn't talk about how he wasn't fully there, but he was just sort of in this like dazedness, and like he talks about the day he comes home and he goes to his daughter's school and she didn't know he was coming home, and it's like everybody's crying, everybody's happy, and he's like crying the hardest. And you really start to feel for his character because how he's describing that scene, that monologue, that specific monologue, which is in episode 4, I want to say, of season 2, where Daredevil has sort of finally caught Punisher. And before the police take him in, like Punisher is giving this really, really great monologue. And I honestly think, like, just as a written piece, because it's just the way that monologue is written, of how the structure of it is actually so good that if you're a theater kid out there and if you want to audition for like a theater, like, check out that monologue, because it's actually not that bad. It's really well written, in contrast to the rest of the season, which isn't that well written. But I'll elaborate on that later. So yeah, John Bernthal kicked ass at the Punisher. He knew when to be sort of the emotionless, just fucking like, I'm just killing people, fuck you sort of thing. But he also knew how to give life and make us sort of sympathize with him and sort of more of empathize and like really understand like where he's coming from and why he's doing all of this and why he's killing all these gangs. So Punisher's side of the story was really awesome until the 4th episode where, and I'll talk about more of why this is sort of a problem for me later, is the Punisher is the main story for the first third of the season, and then it gets turned sort of into a side story because something else major comes into play. And so then Punisher gets turned into a side story a little bit, and then sort of comes back as a main story near the end, and it becomes muddled at one point. But overall, his story, if they had just focused on him throughout the season, I think it still would have been great. But obviously a different factor played into the season, which is the next thing I want to talk about. And another person from Twitter asked me about this, which was Sean Donahue. He asked, I'm only on episode 7, but how do you feel about the portrayal of Elektra in this adaptation? So once Punisher gets caught in like the 4th episode, he's finally taken into the police station and he finally has to like have a court hearing or whatever. Elektra comes into play. She's introduced into the show, and she's played by Elodie Young, and I am in the middle of Elektra because I really loved specifically the relationship between Elektra and Daredevil and how they slowly like revealed that throughout the season of all the flashback scenes of how Matt and Elektra first met when Matt was in college, and she sort of like they sort of happened to have just met just out of the blue. We learn later that wasn't really the case, that she actually orchestrated him to meet her at this sort of fancy party or whatever. But anyway, you sort of learn about like how their relationship is sort of like this sort of crazy, like, let's do whatever the fuck we want. And to be honest, Elektra Daredevil is probably the hottest couple of 2016. I'm going to say it right here. Because specifically, there's a scene where, and this is before Matt is even thinking about being a crime fighter, not even like wearing the black ninja suit or anything. There's a scene where they break into Matt's dad's like sort of old like boxing training studio. They break in and sort of Matt's reminiscing and all this stuff. And throughout these flashback scenes, you can tell Elektra can sense that there's something more than meets the eye with Matt. Like Matt is blind, but she feels like there's something special with him. And she realized it when they go into the fighting, the boxing ring. She tries to start fighting Matt, and Matt's able to avoid all of it because he's got the weird blindness, but he's not really blind. He's in red. You can see in red or whatever. I don't know. So she realizes like, there is more than meets the eye with Matt, and like she gets really excited, and she and so they start fighting, not to like actually like really hurt or kill each other, but to show off like what he can do and what she can do as well, because she told Matt beforehand like, oh, I took ballet lessons, but then Matt's like, you didn't just take ballet lessons. She's like, no, I didn't. I know how to fight. And so that fight scene is actually like the sexiest fight scene ever, and you know it's the sexiest fight scene because it ends in sex. That's how fucking crazy and wild this relationship is, and I loved every fucking minute of it. And so we get into like the current sort of that was like sort of flashbacks, and we get into the current story where Elektra, her father's company, she's trying to figure out if this one other company that they're associated with are doing like shady things, and she wants Matt to help. And she makes Matt help, which distracts from the Punisher storyline. And then we slowly start to learn that this company might be dealing with Yakuza. And then it turns out it's not even Yakuza. It's actually this organization called The Hand. And The Hand is heavily associated in comics, heavily associated with sort of Daredevil stuff. So you might know it pretty well. And I sort of knew about The Hand before I watched the season. But it turns into this sort of Hand thing and this war between the Hand and Stick. And if you don't remember, Stick was the guy who trained Matt as a kid when Matt like first became blind. Stick is the older blind gentleman. And so Stick comes back and he's like sort of at like the secret war with the Hand. And it turns into that, and there's like this old like story about how the Hand found this young child called what they call Black Sky, and apparently this young child had like all of these like crazy powers that could like rise up the Hand and like make them be in like super crazy control of the city or something. And then the story goes that Stick found Black Sky and killed Black Sky, killed this young child. But then we find out in this sort of weird turn of events that Elektra is Black Sky. And that sort of reveal was, it was a little weird. And it was just because of how that whole episode was sort of written, how specifically that reveal scene was written of Elektra. She had, throughout the season, we see that she has sort of this rage and this adrenaline rush whenever she kills someone. She like, it's almost like she needs to kill people. That's how like obsessed she is with it. And when they revealed to her that she's Black Sky, she's like, oh, it all makes sense now. This is like why I'm crazy. And you think she's going to turn, and she does for a minute, but then she turns to back to the side of Daredevil and Stick, and it just turned, her story became very muddled. So that's what turned into the main story and sort of pushed Punisher to the sidelines a little bit. Because for the main part, like once Elektra gets introduced, that's really all Matt is doing, is helping out Elektra and leaving Foggy and Karen to deal with Punisher, because they decide to represent Punisher for his court case, because Karen is weirdly obsessed with the Punisher because she found out that him killing these gangs wasn't the full story, and she's actually the reason why we find like slowly learn all of these things. And there's like this weird cover up with the DA, and like the DA had to do with Punisher's family being killed, and like that story is interesting, of the DA having to do with with Punisher's family being killed, and the way they did it was cool in a way of like sort of character motivation driving the plot, but it didn't. Her motivation for wanting to help Punisher never really made sense to me, and so that's sort of where Punisher's story turned a little for the worst for myself. And then they have a good case, and they're trying to knock the original sort of decision that the court makes is like he's going to get 3 life sentences, and they dwindle it down to 1. If you think the court case is going to go well, and then Punisher is sent up to the stand at one point. He's been going along with this sort of PTSD, sort of like he's been through a lot, and that's why he killed all of these people. But then he ruins the entire thing. He's like, you know what? I would fucking do it again. Yeah, like I'm not crazy. Like I know what I was doing. So I'm guilty. Like send me to fucking prison. And he gets sent to prison because he does this. Because before he sort of goes up to the stand, a cop tells him, like the cop that's in like the courtroom, he's like, remember what you want. And you're like, oh shit, there's some like really shady shit going on, not even with the DA, but with the police as well. Like the police are involved in sort of this secret thing that is going around in Punisher's life. And you think, oh, this is even bigger than we thought. And so Punisher, he basically tanks his own court case, and you're like, okay, there's got to be a reason to this. There's got to be like this bigger overall thing that's happening here. And it ends up just being that Kingpin, who's in jail, wanted Punisher to meet him in jail to talk with Punisher, and that scene was actually really cool. That like sort of final shot in that episode of like Punisher's like he's being processed and all of this stuff, and like a couple of guards like send him outside, and they're like you have like 10 minutes or whatever, and he goes outside, and you think the way they shot it was a little weird because it looks like they're like sending him just back out and like letting him escape, but then you realize that he's just sort of going like into like an outside sort of like workout place, and it's shown that Kingpin is there, and so you think like, oh shit, Kingpin's like orchestrating this whole thing, like it has to do with him. But it was really Kingpin just wanted Punisher to come to jail so Punisher could take out this like other villain dude who was in prison, so Kingpin could take over the prison. And so Kingpin's involvement felt very forced, and it didn't pull everything together like I wanted it to. It felt like its own separate thing that if you left it out, I feel like if Punisher went to jail and then escapes, he eventually escapes, and he just escaped of his own ability. Nothing from the rest of the season would have changed. So Kingpin, sort of a little couple episode storyline, felt really forced into it when you already have all of this shit going on with like Punisher and sort of Elektra and the Hand and Stick and all of this shit. It just felt there's just like an overstimulation at one point with all of these different storylines. And so I don't even know where to go from here because the whole season just feels very muddled in my brain right now. So the next thing I guess I want to talk about is sort of the last couple episodes, because I think this is where it really fell apart. In the last couple of episodes, like Punisher escapes jail, and he's going after this guy who might have also had something to do with his family being killed. He was called the Blacksmith. That's what people were calling him. This mysterious guy called the Blacksmith. And you're thinking like, oh, this is going to be a really big reveal. Like you think it's going to be like a comic book character that they're just giving another name, and he's going to be revealed like, no, I'm not. Like, they might call me the Blacksmith, but I'm really fucking the Dormammu. I know that's not related to Punisher, but you thought it was going to be a reveal to someone we know. But Blacksmith just ended up being like this one guy that gets like blown up on a boat by Punisher. And then at one point, Karen, again, weirdly obsessed with Punisher and making sure he's a good guy, thinks that Punisher was also killed on this boat explosion that he caused. And so she wants to grieve, and the person she grieves with is like this general that Frank Castle, the real name of the Punisher, served under when he was in Iraq. And the general was at the court case, and he testified in favor for Frank. He was like, like, Frank is a great man. He deserves like a Purple Heart and all this stuff of like all this stuff that he'd done. And then after we think Punisher's dead and Karen goes to grief with the general, she's like, he was killed and whatever. There's this weird turn of events where the general actually doesn't like the Punisher and has this weird vendetta against him or something. And then like some weird shit happens, and he's like, he holds her at gunpoint and he makes her drive into like a forest, and then the Punisher is actually alive and drives his car into the car that the general and Karen are in. And there's this whole weird turn of events that didn't really make sense to me. And so Punisher kills this general dude who for some reason was a bad guy. And at one point in sort of the final big fight, which was Daredevil, Elektra, and Nobu, who was the big ninja guy in the first season, who had like the chain with like the like knife at the end of it, who we thought was killed, but apparently the Hand knows how to overcome death or whatever. And you're like, all right, fucking Ra's al Ghul, get the fuck out of here. So anyway, like Nobu's really alive, and that's like the big final fight is Daredevil and Elektra fighting against Nobu. And before this fight, there's a great monologue, or this is like sort of this great back and forth between Daredevil and Elektra, of how like Matt is like willing to like leave his life behind, and like if they survive this, like he would love to like run away with her and go to other like somewhere else with her, and because he realizes throughout the season that he needs her and he's in love with her. And like at that moment you're like, all right, she's dying. Like there's no way that she's getting out alive in this situation. If he's confessing that he'll run away with her, there's no way that's gonna work. In itself, the scene in itself was cool, but you just knew it was going to set up her death. So there's this big fight, and then she ends up dying, and there's like a real sad death scene that really only left reminded me of the bad taste in my mouth from the Daredevil movie from 14 years ago, I think, at this point, where Elektra dies, and then she gets her own movie and she's resurrected or some shit. And there's also hints of her being resurrected by the Hand later on, which that whole thing was like, all right, thanks for reminding me that there's a shitty movie, 2 shitty movies about this fucking 12 years ago. I don't really care. And so it sort of like all came together where Punisher helped out Daredevil and like on top of the on top of the roof where they're all fighting, because there's like a bunch of like people of the Hand fighting Daredevil and he's being overcome. But then you see Punisher from like another building like sniping a lot of the guys from the Hand. And it just really reminded me of the ending of Arkham Knight, where you think Batman is like about to die because Scarecrow has got a gun at his head, and then you see Red Hood shoot the gun out of Scarecrow's hand, and like that's a really cool moment. But then like there's no moment after that where the Red Hood comes down and he's like, hey, like, I used to be a dick before, but now there was no like moment between Batman and Red Hood, and that reminded me, the scene in Daredevil reminded me a lot of that, because it's like Punisher's helping out Daredevil and then he just sort of leaves and it's like, all right. But it's not the last we see of Punisher, which is cool, because there's this whole like sort of montage at the end of like how things are wrapping up for different characters. Like you see Elektra's being put in this like weird big ass thing by the Hand, which implies that she's going to be resurrected, and when she is, she's probably going to be crazy and be a villain or whatever. And but then they also cut to like Punisher, he's like burning his house, the house he used to live in with his family, and so he's like burning that house, and that was a really great point. And then we also learned that Foggy, like Nelson and Murdoch, is also no more, because Matt has been continually like fucking over Foggy and Karen, and so Foggy gets tired of it, and he's like, you know what, we can't do this anymore, and so he leaves. And there's a cool and this is to the point where we get to a cool crossover with Jessica Jones, where if you remember the lawyer friend from Jessica Jones, the older like woman with like the black short haircut, who's sort of friends with Jessica Jones but sort of a dick to her sometimes, she actually hires Foggy for her law firm. So that was like a cool little like Easter egg of Jessica Jones stuff. So I know my review of this and like the way I was sort of going through storylines, it seems a little weird, but that's just sort of how I feel in general about the season. I felt like the storytelling was a little muddled, and I think that was mainly because they tried to involve way too many characters this season. Season 1 was great. There were a couple throwaway episodes in season 1, of course, but season 1 was great because it was all based around Kingpin, and it all came back to him. And at one point, like, at first I didn't hate all of the villains in the season, because I thought it was going to wrap up into like one main villain, or like someone was orchestrating all of this, but it never really came to that. It did raised more questions than it did answer. So it wasn't a satisfying season, but that's not to say it was a terrible season. It didn't have that satisfying ending that season 1 had. And so that's why I feel very muddled about it. But before I give my sort of final score, I have one more viewer question, which is from none other than Sean Pitts, who asks, hallway scene or stairway scene, which was better? Now, of course, if you've seen season 1, there's the famous hallway scene where Daredevil is trying to save this little child who's been kidnapped. And it's this very beautiful shot, all done in one take. Like, they choreographed it up the fucking ass. They did this scene all in one take of Daredevil walking down this hallway, and he like turns left into a doorway, and he starts like fighting all of these guys, but the camera stays in the hallway. So there's a lot of fights going on in these 2 different rooms, but you don't see it all. But whenever they come into the hallway, into the shot, like that's where it gets really interesting of all of the fighting. And then in the stairway scene, which is in season 2, which is very similar to the hallway scene, where at the end of episode 3, I want to say, which is that is probably the best episode of this season, because I think that episode stands out on its own. It's just like, its own sort of story. If like someone were to say, hey, I just want to make like a short like 50-minute thing of Daredevil, and they showed this off, like it would hold up on its own and not within the context of the rest of the season. Of like Punisher has Daredevil tied up on this roof through the entire episode, and they're talking sort of about their stances on killing and being a vigilante and all of this stuff. And at one point, like Punisher creates a situation where Daredevil might have to kill someone and yada, yada, yada. But at one point, Daredevil knocks out Punisher. And the reason they're on this rooftop was because Punisher was about to fuck with one of the gangs that was involved with his family's killing. And so he like blows up all of their bikes. They're a biker gang. And they come outside and they see Punisher and Daredevil like on top of like the roof across the street. So they start going into that building to get to Punisher and Daredevil. And so, but before they get to him, Daredevil knocks Punisher out and puts him into this elevator. And you think like, oh God, like thank God they like just got away in the nick of time because the gang is running towards the elevator like down this hallway. But then a fucking just like some regular dude leaves his like enters the hallway and leaves his apartment, and the biker gang like some of the guys start like messing with the old dude. And Daredevil stops the fucking elevator doors to go save this guy and lets the elevator doors close on Punisher and starts fighting all of these guys. And it starts in the hallway, it starts going down these stairs. And it's very reminiscent of the hallway scene of just like, it all looks like one shot. It isn't really. There are some obvious takes where you're like, okay, they had to do this a couple of times. And they did some really quick editing things to make it seem all like one shot. So it ends up in this staircase, and there's really cool moments where like Daredevil has like this chain, and he like chokes a guy who's up on like a floor above him, and is pulling him over like the railing, and you think he's just gonna choke him to death, but he breaks the railing, and the guy falls down like a floor, and he goes down and fighting all of these people, and then he ends on the bottom floor to try to get Punisher, but Punisher escapes, or what, he like woke up in the elevator and escaped. So the stairway scene is this production, this team saying like, the hallway scene was like, hey, this is sort of the vision we have for fight scenes for Daredevil. But they probably didn't have like the sort of budget that they did for this season because it was sort of this new thing, this new project, and they probably didn't have as much money as they did this season. So the stairway scene is just sort of like the hallway scene, but with a budget and being able to do more crazy shit. Because there's obviously, I honestly don't think they, there's some shots where it looks a little more edited to make it look like it actually happened, but I don't think some of the things in the fight did actually happen. And the choreo, there are moments in the stairway scene where it looked like, when you're watching this, you're like, oh, this looks really choreographed. So my answer is I like the hallway scene better, because even though you know it's choreographed, like I watched both of the scenes last night to sort of compare and contrast, and the hallway scene in season 1, you know it's choreographed, you know they took time and time again to get it right, and it was all done in one shot. But when you're watching it, it doesn't feel choreographed, and that's why I like the hallway scene better, because when you're watching it, it feels like this more like raw power fight, and like you slowly, minute by minute, slowly see Daredevil's energy like just draining, where he's like, after he punches a guy, he's like falling over, and it just seems more real, and that's something I love. And also the cinematography there is just so simplistic and so beautiful that it stands out to me more than a lot of like the moving the camera did in the stairway scene. And it's that kind of cinematography in which I love Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is one of my favorite TV shows, and Breaking Bad does that a lot, where a camera will focus on one thing and have a lot of other things going on around it. And it's sort of that kind of cinematography that I really, really love. And so that's why I prefer the hallway scene, because you don't see like half of the fight, and that's like left to your imagination. That's why that fight is so cool, especially like sort of when the fight starts and Daredevil is in like a room closer to the camera, and a guy leaves a room farther down the hallway, and he comes to he leaves that room, comes to the doorway where the fight's going on, and you think he's just gonna walk into the room and start fighting, but a fucking microwave gets like thrown in his fucking head. So there's like these moments where you're like, oh shit. And there were moments like that in the stairway scene, but you see all of it. You said there's nothing left to imagination, and that's what I really love is when you have sort of really beautiful, simplistic cinematography and things to imagine, and that's why I prefer the hallway scene. So there you go, Sean Pitts. There's your answer. So anyway, wrapping up my thoughts on Daredevil Season 2, currently streaming on Netflix, is I think the build-up for the season was great. The first half of it was really, really well done. A lot of the relationships built between the characters were just very interesting and constantly grabbed you. And the beginning of the season, you're like, you don't feel like any of the episodes are a waste. Like they aren't any throwaway episodes, which the first season had a couple of those. But then at one point, the season sort of splits off in these two storylines that I wanted to come together, but they never did. And so it just didn't have that satisfying feeling of it. So the story just got a little too much and a little too spread out for myself. So, and that's really important to me. If you know me personally, when I talk about video games or movies or TV or even music, I love all of these things because of the stories these things tell. So story and character development is always the most important to me, and I feel like a lot of the story and character development later on in the season gets muddled and confusing and weird and not well explained, which is why I wish that they've did more focus on just Punisher and maybe make the hand sort of a side thing. And because they made the hand at one point the main thing, so you thought questions were going to be answered. But if you made the hand sort of the sideline sort of story and slowly build it up and make you slowly realize, oh, this might be bigger, and then have like a big twist at the end of the season, and then be like, oh shit, what's gonna happen in season 3? Like who is this organization? I feel like they answered enough in this season for me to not be interested anymore. So it's just a lot of muddled things in the season. But with that factored in to also the production value and also the acting and the directing, I would probably give this season I'd probably give it a 7.5 out of 10, which is, I think, the same exact score I gave season 1. So there you go. There are my thoughts on Daredevil season 2 on Netflix. What are some of your thoughts? You can leave your thoughts in the comments below, or you can tweet them at me. Have a conversation with me about why you may disagree with me, or maybe different points that I may not have understood or anything. I'm always welcome to an open discussion about all this dumb shit I talk about on the internet. So thank you guys so much for watching this, and until the next BzG reviews, which will probably be later this week. I wonder what else we could be reviewing this week. I wonder if it's also comic book related and sort of a movie. I wonder if in this comic book movie, it's like, an actor in it has also been associated with Daredevil. I wonder. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me one more time. And until next time, have a great day full of good, all great, it's not great, but good Netflix shows, much like Netflix Marvel's Daredevil. Thank you.